Hello and welcome. This is the Actually Art and Books Festival 2021 online. I'm Photo Storms, and you're welcome to this panel discussion on love, sex, and relationships. Joining me, we have Makosi Lesimile. Hi, Makosi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We also have Angelica Lindsay Addy. Welcome, Angelica.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we've got Jerome Yauvi Unikade. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's quite exciting to be the only male, in the midst of very, very beautiful, wonderful females. And then I actually remember that September 20th was Angelica's birthday. So, Angelica, I'd like to say happy belated birthday to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Jerome.
Thank you.
Okay, jumping straight into the conversation. This is something that's fundamental to everybody, talking about love, sex, and relationships. Everybody has a desire to feel companionship. Everyone has a desire to feel loved and to be connected. But in this time of the world, especially looking at the theme of this year's festival, which is generational discordance, there are a lot of different ideas of what relationships look like. There are a lot of concepts as to whether sex is important in relationships or not, how we can navigate that. And I love that every single one of our panelists, like each of you, is coming from such a different and diverse background. So I would love to start off with Makosi. If you could talk us through a little bit your idea of this conversation, how you feel about it, and why it's important for you to lend your voice to this topic of discussion.
Thank you so much again for having me. So this is it's a topic that's close to my heart because I'm living as a disabled woman in Cape Town, South Africa, and trying to navigate the dating scene, especially as a Black disabled woman, is quite an interesting challenge. So being able to talk about what I consider love and relationships and what they should entail is an interest of mine. So yeah, it's I'm very personally invested in it because there's so much that happens around me with regards to everything that we're talking about today that we usually not included in as a disabled person.
Thank you very much for that. It is actually quite important, and I'm definitely going to dig in a bit more. Angelica, as well, your approach to this is a little bit different, also known as the village auntie. I absolutely love that because everybody needs to discuss their problems with their auntie. So talk to me about how you became the village auntie and why this topic for you is something that needs to be discussed, especially from an African perspective and a female perspective as well.
Thank you for that. So I became the village auntie as a way of reclaiming a traditional role that's found especially within West African societies and cultures. As a woman who is African American, so I was raised in the United States, but I've recently done my ancestry and traced it back to the Yoruba people of Nigeria. So I really do feel that it is important for children of the diaspora like me to reclaim those ancestral pathways to knowledge and information. There was always a woman in the village that you could go to. Maybe she wasn't connected to you as a blood-related kin, but she was someone that you could go to dissect these larger issues and challenges in life, sex and relationships being one of them. As a visibly practicing Muslim woman who comes from an interfaith family where my mother and all of my siblings are very devout Christians, I saw that there was a disconnect when it came to conversations about sex, love, and relationships because there is a hypersexualized public faith for especially Black women. And that gets muted when we become very religious or spiritually inclined. My work really focuses on bringing us to a healthy balance in the middle. You can enjoy sex. It's important to enjoy sex. It's important to engage in love relationships while also being a spiritually minded and spiritually focused person. So I think we have to have more practical approaches. And I love the topic of this year's festival, generational discordance, because one of the things that I do is I try to bridge that generational gap. I'm 46, so I'm sort of in the middle. I'm not quite young. I'm not quite old just yet. And I think that there are a lot of things that get lost in translation. So it's important for us to have communication about what love and sex really looks like and be very honest and open, because that transparency can lead us to better outcomes when we engage with other human beings.
Okay, definitely a lot to unpack there. Thank you so much for that, Angelica. And coming over to you, Jerome, you're coming from a traditional approach to things, being a matchmaker, someone who's been happily married for very many years. And I would love to know what your perspective on this is, this conversation, especially in light of Gen Z and looking at what we have on social media and what some may consider very hypersexualized, to borrow the word that Angelica used, sort of view on relationships and love in this day and age. What is your take, Jerome?
Yeah, I actually think that, when it comes to sex, love, relationship, it will always be a topic for all times. Now, as a marriage counselor and also as a relationship coach, I find a lot of people really want to get into love. A lot of people want to be loved. A lot of people want someone who's going to love them and someone they also can have opportunity to love at the same time. However, you find out that people find love and they find it very difficult to stay in it. So you still find a lot of breakups. There's been so much breakups lately. There's been so much divorce around. And then I think if this is happening, there's probably a missing gap, which I'm hoping that in this particular time, this particular session that we're having today, the three of us who are panelists will be able to look at ways that we can help people to find love and stay in love, at the same time. Everybody needs to listen to this, especially at this point in time.
Thank you. So the first thing I'm going to challenge now is our perception of what we believe love is, what that looks like, and what that feels like for people. Because when we talk about love, for some people growing up, it's this very romanticized Disney, Prince Charming who's willing to crawl over broken glass and sacrifice everything for this one woman. What does love in today's world look like? What do relationships look like? Are we talking about people who are independently together, so they have their own independent lives, but they sort of decide to come together and they're not living together as codependents, for example, which is a separate thing? And then how can that change depending on your life circumstances? And with that, I'm going to go to you again, Makosi. And I say that because I understand that because you had TB meningitis, is that correct? It affected your spine, which is how you became a person living with a disability. And I'd love to just get a sense of this idea of love, what you were sort of conditioned to feel love was like, whether that conditioning remains the same, whether you still perceive love in the same way, and how that affects you as a person living with a disability also.
What an interesting question. So the funny thing about growing up and being told about love is that when you look at Disney movies, you hardly ever saw Black women in them, let alone dark-skinned Black women. Now I'm disabled. You hardly ever see disabled people anywhere, let alone in love stories or being a love interest to somebody. Prior to my disability, I was living with an able-bodied partner. We were both able-bodied, and because we're in a committed relationship, I thought, no. So according to the script that I've read, I was in my early 30s. If something happens to me, this man is going to stick around. We're going to figure it out. This love is going to carry us through this challenge, of living as a disabled woman. It didn't happen like that. My relationship ended. And then I had to go back to the outside world and see what was on offer for me as a disabled woman. And I'm finding that even today, it's a huge challenge because people are saying, if you're not mobile, then what use are you of me in a relationship? Because I've realized that so much of being considered love worthy or somebody who can be in a relationship depends on my physical mobility. So I'm having to redefine love for myself in a different way. So now I take practicalities. If you don't keep your word on the first date, then I definitely can't be with you because I'm living as a person who needs to be able to trust the person that is around me. So I'm having to rewrite my own love story and redefine my own rules about love and relationship. And it's an ongoing journey. Let me just say that. But what we read about and what we see in real life are two completely different things.
I hear you. But does anyone else want to jump in? Please feel free. I want this conversation to be as fluid as possible. And I would love everyone's sort of take and perspective on love, what they think love is, because I think when you come to a relationship and deciding what type of relationship you want, a lot of us have spoken about how love is sort of a fundamental basis for that. But do you have to be in love to be in a relationship? What does love look like for you? And what could it look like for other people as well?
No, I was just going to chime in and say that I never wanted to be in love. I never wanted to be in a committed relationship because of the relationship trauma that I saw around me within my own family and my community. I was one of those anti-romantic early 20 somethings. I'm never going to get married. I'm just going to travel the world. I'm never going to have children. And then I met my husband, who was a blind date. And he really changed my perspective about what love looks like in a relationship, because I had always thought that love was non-volitional. You fall in love, it's no choice. You know, your eyes meet across the room, you're the fairy tale princess. But when I met my husband, it was a conscious decision that both of us made to love each other. It was built on mutual trust and respect and independence, which is what I thought that I would lose if I fell in love and got into a relationship. I thought my idea of love growing up was very duty driven, especially as a woman. You have to cook, you have to clean, you have to be pretty, you have to be sexy for your husband. And that just sounded exhausting to me. And then here I meet this man. My husband is from Ghana. And his idea of love was very much service oriented. It sounds very like conservative and staid and not very exciting, but it was service not just to himself, but to the relationship. So the ways in which he showed up for me, the ways in which he could communicate love without saying the words, I love you, was just so refreshing because it embodied a love practice that I thought didn't exist. One of the things that I'm trying to do, not just in my work, but in my personal life with my children, is to show them that there are so many different ways that love can manifest and so many different ways that relationships can exist. I'm a firm believer in the fact that my husband is just one of my soulmates. You don't have to just have one soulmate. My best friend is a soulmate. That finding intimacy and that love connection in platonic relationships has really helped me to build my romantic relationship with my husband. It's really built a strong foundation. So I think having more expansive definitions of what love is and really creating that culture within your relationship for yourself, for me, has been really transformational. And I'm glad that I opened my mind to a different possibility. Otherwise, I would have never been able to experience what I'm experiencing right now.
Amazing. That's such an interesting perspective on that. Just even understanding how to have relationships that are platonic and loving in a platonic relationship and how that can translate into your romantic relationship. So in your marriage counselor role, as well as your matchmaking role, Jerome, do you find this to be true, that people perhaps in their individual lives have got to figure out what it is to love a person? And do you find that people are always putting conditions on the love? I mean, that's something that I feel was referenced a little bit in how Makosi sort of addressed this. What are your thoughts, Drew?
Yeah, so you find out that most of the time in the families, a lot of children grew up realizing that love is conditional. The parents don't mean any harm. In trying to encourage their children to do so well, they may place certain conditions actually on what you do for you to be loved or for you to be shown more love through giftings and so many things like that. Now, when it comes to psychosocial development, most of the time, though, you need to be able to perform certain tasks to get to grow up, to become responsible, to get to somewhere. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a situation where I'm told that if I come first in class, then I'm going to get this. If I come first in class, then this is going to happen. Naturally, in my mind already, I'm beginning to think that I have to do something. I have to be good enough to be accepted. I have to be perfect to be normal before other people. So what happens to me at that point in time is I begin to package myself for what I think the people will want to see. And a lot of people are doing that right now, even when it comes to relationships. So you find out that the people you're dating right now, you really don't know them because they're packaging themselves for the social media. They're packaging themselves in the way they feel they'll be accepted by other people. And in packaging and packaging and packaging, by the time you get married, you find out that what you got married to is not what you're really seeing in marriage at the end of the day. And this is causing a lot of problems at the end of the day. Now, one of the things about love is love don't have to have conditions. I'm talking about the kind of love that goes into the kind of relationships we're talking about. We're talking about a level of relationship with so much intensity that can survive anything. And when I mean can survive anything, I mean can survive anything. The very first time I saw Lorenta, my wife, she was 12 years old. And I was 12 years old. She was 11 years old. And then at 19, we started to, date. And at 19, I made a promise to her. I said, Lorenta, I love you so much. and I'm going to marry you. And at 22, I got married to Loretta. She was 21, and we
Oh,
started our lives together. Okay, I got married at 22, and Loretta was 21. By the time I was 26, we have had three of our sons. We have four sons altogether. And guess what? I was taking care of my family. I was working hard to make sure that I take care of them. I was doing a lot to show them how much, first of all, my wife means to me. Because I don't know what, but I really, really realized that I like my wife so, so, so much. And I was ready to do anything just to keep her. I found her so easy to talk to. I found out that I was myself completely while I was with her. I did not have to pretend. She accepted me completely. Then something happened. And this is what I'm trying to say. Love don't have to have conditions placed on it. Then something happened. And eventually, I cheated on my wife. It was bad. It was pretty, pretty bad. Take my word for it when I say bad. It's probably worse than bad, but I can just say bad. But what she did was eventually she found a way of forgiving me. I know that, okay, one of the reasons why she forgave me was because, okay, she was a Christian, she would pray, she believed in what God had to say about forgiveness and all. But she now told me that was not all. That the reason why she found it in her heart to forgive me was this: all the things I had done for her, all the sacrifices I had made for her, made her to find a foundation and a great platform to forgive. That taught me a lot of lessons. Now, she wasn't telling me, do this for me, do that for me, do this for me, do that for me. No, I loved. And what does love do? Love does. Love is a verb. And so love is about doing for the other person. When you do, impression has been created. The other person remembers everything you've done. Sex is about having, love is about doing. You do love, you have sex, but at the end of the day, you find out that one always wins over the other, despite the fact that you need both to work together.
I mean, I think it's such a very dope story. I don't know if I say dope, but I think it's a dope story, that you met and you got married at such a young age and you are still together. Because I I know that especially for millennials, I'm in my 30s, I'm in my early 30s, and Gen Z as well, the level of exposure that this generation has with access to the internet, with all this knowledge and information, does mean that people are a lot more skeptical in a certain way. We're also learning that for women, at least for myself, I thought that I was one way in my 20s, and I got to 25, 30, like everything completely changed, and just getting a little bit more knowledge and information about myself. And I sort of wonder what made you feel at that age, at 22, 21, that that was it, and whether at any point, I mean, even in the cheating phase, whether that was that a crisis of what are we doing? Do we know what's going on? Because in my 30s now, I have no children. I've never been married. And, some of these life decisions that people make quite young, I do wonder how are we able to do that? And I wonder what aspect of your friendship, whether it was the longevity of the friendship from before that got you to that place. I'd love if you could talk about that. And of course, Makosi, Angelica, please do indicate if you want to chip in as well, so that we can make sure it's a rounded conversation.
I'll wait for Jerome to respond because I also had the question about the connectivity between him and his wife, because I can imagine finding the love of your life in childhood, and growing up to be with this person. And here I am in my late 30s trying to make sense of even finding somebody to treat me nicely, So I'm quite interested to hear what his response will be. How he knew, how do you know that this is it?
Thank you very much, Makosi, for that. I did a lot of things too fast. I mean, my life just moved very fast and very quickly. I don't know if sometimes I feel like I'm 10 years ahead of my peers, but then my life went too quickly. However, when I'm a very intuitive person, very, very intuitive. The first time I saw Loretta at 12, she was 11. I felt something about her, but we weren't really friends. While we became teenagers, we went to the same kind of parties. We will meet, we will talk, and we will do all of that. Then a friend of mine came in and said, "Hi, Jerome, I'd like you to meet someone. Why don't you just quickly come?" And then I went to her house, and there was Lorenta sitting down. I was so excited, honestly speaking. Lorenta and myself sat down, and for the first time, we're able to talk alone. We spoke for hours on ending. It was like, it was not the first time. It was like, this is it. This is the moment. This was supposed to happen. By the time that had happened, I think it was 6 days later that I called and I said, "You know what? I really like you. and I really would like to, I want to marry you. And I knew that was it. For me, I knew that was it. Now, what happened when it comes to cheating? It's one thing for you to marry, it's another thing for you to have experience when it comes to certain things that happen in marriage. Our children came, pop, 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 just like that. And so that thing about attention, getting Loretta's full attention was gone at that point in time. And so I didn't know. I mean, it wasn't something I was conscious of. I wish I could have it still to myself, but she needed to take care of the children. They came too fast and they came, just like that. And so while she was still trying to finish up with one, the second one and the third one, our hands were quite full. Now, so at that time, I didn't want to disturb her. I didn't want to do anything. I got myself talking to somebody else. It wasn't supposed to be anything that seemed dangerous, but it was dangerous because at this point in time, I was given that time, that special time that I would rather give to Lorenta. I was giving it to this lady. And guess what? Everything was just happening until it was a relationship at the end of the day. I've learned that now. When I look back right now, I'm realizing that what I needed to have done was actually to be there to assist Lorenta. It might not be my area of strength. And as a matter of fact, it is not my area of strength, right? I would have been there, right there to see, despite the fact that I was doing two jobs, I found out that rather than being there and learning to do a few things, I was not doing all that. Because of that, I started getting lonely. I did not need to have been lonely. And I didn't want to discuss it with Lorenta because I felt if I did, it will hurt her. And she will feel, come on, Jerome. I mean, you see all the things I'm doing. You see things can't be the same anymore. And that's what I think we who are men need to begin to understand. Once the woman starts to have a child, there might be divided attention. And we need to know how to navigate and still keep love going, which of course we did and we're doing right now. And things are getting a lot better.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Makosi, did you want to chip in, or Angelica?
I'll chime in and just say, as a woman, I have 4 children, and I think postpartum depression and hormones and emotional shifts are definitely something that we have to consider in relationships. And I think that's something that Jerome is seeing in hindsight. But I also think something that stood out for me and what he said, and something that I try to teach, especially people who are millennials and Gen Z. So I'm just going to say, we don't make marriage look like fun. We don't. If I was 25, there's no way that I would want to get married. If I was 35, I'd be like, you guys, this seems like a chore. This does not seem like fun at all. We also live as a part of the iPhone era. Every year there's a new iPhone, right? Every year I'm going to get a new girlfriend, a new boyfriend, a new fiance. We live in a very disposable generation in terms of how we approach the material aspects of our lives as well as emotional connection. But one of the things that I heard Jerome say, I really try to impress this upon people who are younger than me, who are contemplating into relationships, is that there is physical intimacy, which we usually think about as sex, right? But there are 4 other types of intimacies that form the basis of really strong relationships. You have spiritual intimacy. Do you nourish a connection to, whatever, spiritual belief system you each have? Do you nourish that together? Like, are you spiritually bonded as well? Do you practice experiential intimacy? What experiences are you having together? Do you go hiking? Do you go, out to eat? Are you into skydiving? Are you into sports? There's intellectual intimacy. Is there space within your relationship to have generative conversations about issues that matter, whether that's politics, whether that's culture? My husband and I love to talk at length about Dumsor in Ghana and like the ways in which natural resources are wasted on the continent and how we can, bring renewable energy. Like, that's fun to me. And I find that very sexy. There's also emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy is the area where we are not teaching our sons how to play. We're not teaching them how to practice. We tell them, stop crying. Boys don't cry. We're not teaching men how to get in touch with their emotions. And so that winds up manifesting in relationships in various ways, whether that's infidelity, whether that's, being cold, whether that's not being open to sex. Men also have challenges when it comes to sex. Body positivity is a thing for men as well. So I love that Jerome pointed that out because he is very transparent and honest about his journey and his level of vulnerability that he needed to have and his resistance. And I think that is something that young men and young women need to hear, because these are the types of conversations that we don't have. We just tell people, okay, you finished your degree, you need to get married. Okay, you're a certain age, you need to have a child, but we're not talking about what are the mechanics of living in a relationship. He said at the top of the show that, we it's easy to get married. The staying married part, that's the hard part. That's the part that we don't talk about enough. And I think we need to talk about that, because we're selling people like a poor bill of sale when we say that all you need to do is find a person, love them, and get married. It's staying the course. That's really the challenging part.
Very interesting. Again, a lot of things are flagged there. Makosi, I saw you nodding to a lot of things. Some of this resonating with you.
All of it is resonating with me. It's the devil is in the detail. I always say I don't say no twice. So as a disabled person, I've learned that if I meet somebody and we start talking or whatever and we have a disagreement and I say no and they try and argue me out of it, then I know that that's not a conversation that's going to continue and that's not somebody that I want to be with. Because if you're going to want me to repeat myself at the beginning of this interaction, then I'm going to have to be repeating myself for the rest of the relationship. So I think that's another reason why I'm struggling to find companionship, because there are a lot of non-negotiables that I have now that I didn't have in my early 20s. I had my kid at 23. She calls me a teenage mother. I only have one kid. And looking at where I was when I had her and where I am now, I can always say that life would definitely be different if I didn't have a child when I did. Because now I'm so much more demanding of myself and the people that I want in my life, that it would be very difficult for me to actually find somebody to have a kid with. So companionship and intimacy, it goes in, like Angelica said, in all the ways. And if you don't find the one, I'm polyamorous as well, so I'm not in a monogamous relationship. But I found that the loves that I find are able to accommodate what I'm looking for at different times. So that's another aspect of the relationship discussion that I'm experiencing, that I get to be a person that negotiates what I'm willing to give in which relationship. Because I only started dating last year. It's an ongoing process and I'm learning a lot about myself.
I love that. Thank you for that. Jerome, I know you want to jump in a sec. I also want us to consider the role of vulnerability and being able to be vulnerable with somebody and being willing to be vulnerable with somebody, especially in a time where we do feel quite exposed. Trust, I think there's a big trust deficit in the way the relationships are handled. And I'm talking about both romantic relationships as well as platonic relationships, even friendships. You see a lot of people calling each other out online. And I just wonder what the advice is as well, and Angelica, when you can chip in on this after Jerome comments, but what the advice you can give people who are struggling, and they are struggling for good reason, to maintain that or to be able to be vulnerable with one another. Also, Jerome, I want you to comment on you speaking about acts of service. I know you didn't use that phrase, Angelica used the phrase, but you did talk about doing and doing. But what isn't there also a danger there, especially for women who feel like they have to do? Women have been programmed and conditioned to do, to be loved. We are told that this is how you're supposed to be. You must do this, you must do that. In fact, the training for the African woman is next level. I've never seen it anywhere before. And that itself, I've seen it to be problematic for younger millennials and Gen Z who throw themselves into relationships thinking, I must cook, I must clean, I will greet his mother, I will greet his auntie. Nobody has married you. This boy is, he's bringing everybody to his mother's house. You think you're special? You're not special, girl. So, Jerome, please go ahead and comment on some of these things, these realities.
Most of what Angelica was saying, about the different ways of connecting with your spouse, you'll be surprised to know my wife and myself, that's Lorenta and myself, do all this, and that's one of the reasons why we're able to stand. Marriage is not just based on common interest. It's actually based on core needs. The core needs itself, most of the core values, basically, common interest will always change. I'll give you an example. If Loretta and myself were so much interested in each other because we find out that we both love Barcelona Football Club, yeah, that can change. We're looking at this year now. Messi had left Barcelona. Guess what I did? Because I was a Messi guy, I left immediately for PSG. That means Loretta would have remained in Barcelona. I would have moved on. But when it's about the core values, You find out that there's something that's glued you together and can make you stay. Now, when it comes to all the things I did for Lorenta, I was not pushed to do it. Now, when you love someone, love has to have an object. If your love hasn't got an object, it's useless and you're just fooling around. When you actually love someone, one of the things you want to do is you want to be there for them. When you love someone, you find out that you think about them. You genuinely think about them. You want to add value to their lives. This has nothing to do with you being forced to do it or somebody telling you that you have to do it. However, like you rightly said, a lot of times right now, most of the things that need to be involved in love is missing. Most of the things don't even start with love. Love. We talk about love, 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 love. Most of the time, it doesn't stop there. One of the first things you find out in a relationship is there has to be truth. Somebody's there telling the truth. Both of you, when you learn to tell the truth, when you actually tell the truth to each other, you've chosen to be transparent. And that was what Loretta and myself did. And that was what blew my mind about Lorenta. I was able to tell her the truth, and she was able to tell me the truth. We had no fear of that. So when you tell the truth, the next thing you find out what will happen is you begin to trust. Trust is the next level. Because you started on the platform of truth, you are able to be open, be transparent, you're telling the truth, and it is possible. Some people would tell you, oh, no, it's not possible. It is possible. If you're not a person of truth, that's a different thing entirely, and you might need to go for counseling for that. But it's possible to tell someone you love the truth. When you tell the truth, what will happen naturally with trust comes in. Both of you begin to learn to trust each other. When you begin to trust each other, a vital aspect of a relationship steps in, and that is respect. Because now you respect this person because you can trust this person. So you find out that you really have a lot of respect for this person right now because you're able to trust this person. And when you now can respect this person, that's when you find yourself to start being in love with the person. It doesn't start with love. What people say is, I just love, it's attraction. People just find out that they are first attracted to this person, but that's not love yet. So when you begin to tell the truth, you learn to trust. As you begin to trust, then you find out that you begin to really, really respect this person.
We did. Yeah. So that how the trust builds and being able to tell the truth. I'm with you. Angelica, I would love if you would chime in as well, please. Also commenting on, the things I raised before, stereotypes, gender issues, the ability to be vulnerable, that pressure sometimes that exists, that this is how you're supposed to be, and how that affects people's relationships, whether it's friendships or romantic relationships.
I think it's important, especially to talk about that gendered conversation and the ways in which we train women, young girls and women to be wives, like from a very early age. My daughter is 13, and my mother-in-law will tease her and say, if we were back in Nima, we would be preparing you to find a husband. She's joking, but I know that there's a dose of truth to that. But we start our girls off knowing how to surrender themselves to a man very early on, instead of focusing on self-love, self-worth, and self-value. That's really where trust is built. It's built with yourself first. You have to be vulnerable with yourself first. You have to love yourself first. A lot of people say marriage is 50-50. It's not. It's 100% of your being connected to 100% of another person's being. Men are taught, and I'm speaking in gendered terms because this is just a reality, especially culturally for African people. Men are taught to be providers. They're taught to be protectors, but they're also taught to be recipients of someone else's intimacy. So they're not taught to use that muscle. So then you have people who are taught to serve with people who are taught to consume, and nobody is really taught how to relate to each other and how to love each other. And then you put social media in the mix, and Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and I'm checking your phone and I got your location turned on, and how come you didn't call me back, and you ghosted me, because we don't really know how to connect. There's a natural human desire to want to be in relationships, but we don't really know what that looks like. So when I'm talking to women, and I've also now just started, teaching men as well, I say, you have to love yourself first. You have to be your favorite person, not your spouse, right? You don't start from there, because especially with women, this is what we do. We surrender before there's a commitment. We are making jollof We making miangujia. We ordering the cayenne mata. We getting the ashwebi for his cousin's wedding. We're coming to clean, to clean up the house after his grandmother. We're doing all of these things, and he's entertaining 5, 6 other girls around the way. Right? Men also do it too. You have this woman that is someone who has standards that you may not be able to meet financially. You may not be able to meet emotionally, but you're still chasing after her because you just have to have this person. We're seeking self-validation externally in these relationships with people who are either unavailable, unapproachable, or unattainable. But what is available, what you can approach, and what you can attain is a level of self-love first. Then when you're comfortable with vulnerability within yourself, and you practice it in your platonic relationships, you practice being honest with your friends, you practice trusting your siblings, you practice being emotionally intimate with your parents and with your church members and with people in your neighborhood. You care for them, you check up on them. Intimacy is a muscle that you have to work, just like every other muscle in your body. Then when a relationship shows up, you know what love looks like. You know what trust looks like. You know what vulnerability looks like. And you know that it's expensive. You're not willing to just spend it so, frivolously around. That is the element that's missing. We're teaching people how to be attracted to each other and how to make themselves attractive, whether that's physically or through whatever they can offer in a relationship. But we're not really teaching, okay, then how do I trust that person? How do I lean into this relationship in a way that is going to make it flower and flourish? And that doesn't start with the other person. It starts with self. It's hard. You can, but it's difficult when you're working through these ideas of self-love, self-worth, and validation while you're in a relationship. It can work, but that's what makes it like a roller coaster ride. If you arrive at the relationship at a point where you trust yourself, you're vulnerable with yourself, you're connected to your emotions, it makes it so much easier to communicate to that to your partner.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that. The village auntie in the building. Come on. Makosi, I'm interested in what your thoughts are on this, especially looking at, I love the discussions of that self-love, of getting to know yourself, getting to understand who you are. And of course, as human beings, we're constantly evolving. That's something that I believe. I don't believe that you're the same person from today that you were 5 years ago. You're always learning and you're always moving forward. And especially as a person living with disability, I wonder also what role that perhaps fear plays, not just for you, and I don't know if it does in any way, but for people who are potential partners or for partners that you are with now, because people are afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of what they don't understand, and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, and because I have a friend as well who recently became a person living with a disability, and I remember when we found out that she'd been in this horrible accident and that her whole life has changed, I really struggled with wrapping my head around what was okay to say, what was not okay to say, how to be around my friend. And then for the first time, seeing this world and understanding how invisible people with disabilities are, how difficult access to anything is. I never thought of how many steps there were in buildings in Lagos until this happened. Like everywhere, step. What's the step for? Who's the step helping? Put a ramp, let people get in. And I wonder what role that plays for you in your relationships and in the way that you choose to relate with people, especially romantically.
Okay, so vulnerability. I had to be vulnerable with myself first and to accept my disability and make peace with it. Inaccessibility is not only a physical manifestation, it's how people treat you as well. Because if I'm not seen outside as well, I can't be approached by potential mates. So you go to all these places and there's steps, but I can't go in because I have a wheelchair. I was making an example that earlier today I had to go get fabric for my dress. And the entrance of the store had 1,000,001 steps, and I had to use the back entrance. So as we're leaving, I'm saying to my brother, if we didn't have this back entrance, I wouldn't have the fabric for my dress. I have to get a lot of my clothes made because I'm in a wheelchair, and designers don't even include us when they're thinking about making clothes. And something as simple as that impacts how I feel, it impacts my confidence, my vulnerability, and I start being afraid, do people not want to see me, wearing nice things? So being able to say, it's not me, when I'm afraid or when I'm feeling vulnerable, it's not me. Inaccessibility is not about me. It's about how the world is. and trying to navigate that around me is quite challenging. So I encourage people to ask questions when I meet partners or when I meet friends and we're going out and they don't know what to say or what to do to help me move around to say, just ask me what I'm comfortable with. It's like when I start having a sexual relationship with someone, I say, I will declare upfront that this is what I can do, this is how far I can go. But ask me if you're feeling uncomfortable about anything, or if you're unsure, or if you think you're going to hurt me, because people also fear that they're going to hurt a disabled person that's interested in something more physical. You have to ask me. If you don't ask me, I don't know what you're thinking. So I can't help you if you don't talk to me. So having to constantly talk to people about my vulnerabilities and my fears is the only way to overcome it, because otherwise I'm going to be stuck in this vortex of uncertainty. And I don't think any of us deserve that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Makosi, as part of this conversation, I know we've talked about vulnerability and self-love and just getting back in touch with yourself and your femininity. And I know that you have a sex toy business, which I came across, and part of that you came into because of your disability. And I would love if you would share with us how that has been part of your journey and how that has helped you, especially bearing in mind a lot of the negative connotations around sex and relationships, and how, people do often speak of how sex can be damaging in a certain way. But I would just love for you to talk about that with us, please.
My favorite subject. So sex toys, I started using them for my health before I started using them for pleasure. And I used them to deal with my incontinence. When I found out that it could help, and it does help, I started wanting to tell everybody about that. If you use a vibrator once a day, it helps you deal with your incontinence if it's something that you're living with as a disabled person. That's how I'm now everywhere talking about sex toys. But being able to use them by myself first has allowed me to be vulnerable with others, and to be able to know what I want, not only sexually, but just in relationships in general. I know people say sex is damaging, but I found that my being able to give myself sexual pleasure and to share the experience with other people has been a very healing experience. I'm not even talking about the emotional aspect of it, just being physically present with somebody has been very healing. It's worked a long way to help me deal with my vulnerabilities. I think when we are at our naked, we're at our most vulnerable. And being able to share that with somebody without fearing that tomorrow they're going to be making fun of me on social media or on the internet has been something that I've had to deal with. So facing my fears and being vulnerable with myself and others sexually has really helped heal a lot of the trauma that I went through in the past 5 years as a disabled woman.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Jerome, I know that you wanted to chime in, so please go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I found out, while Makosi was talking, I realized that I probably have been doing the right thing. In the past, what I'd done was I would just try to bring people together. I would get your profile, get somebody else's profile, do a match and all that sort of thing. I realized that the people were asking for too much. Most of what they were asking for was quite unrealistic. And that's because they do not actually understand these other people. So you find a guy who says, I don't want a full-bodied woman. I don't want a woman that is very slim, or I don't want a short guy. I have never met a lady who wanted a short guy for a relationship. Never in my time as a matchmaker. So everybody wants a tall guy, and all that sort of thing. So what I did was I started the Jerome's Dating Classroom, where I could bring everybody together, teach on a lot of things that has to do with relationship, with love, and also with marriage. And then something started happening. The guy who thought he will never be with a woman that is crippled started showing interest in her. And guess why? Because he was now exposed to her, would listen to her talk in the classroom, would listen to a few things that she was doing, and he became very observing of her. And along the line, started showing a lot of interest. And so the guy who feels, I don't want to marry a full-bodied woman, I want to marry somebody who is, started actually showing interest in somebody else that he will never thought about getting married to, because people started seeing people for who they really are.
Yeah.
And naturally they started to get attracted and they wanted to know more about them. And that was how real marriages started for us. Somebody may not start that where you are, but you might need to start that. Yeah.
I know that you have quite a bit to add in on this conversation, so please do just go right ahead and share with us.
So I really love, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Makosi. I just want to come to wherever you are and just sit and listen to you talk. Uh,
I'm coming to Ghana soon.
because the conversation around ableism and sex is not something that we often hear. And the conversation about sex being distinct from emotions is a conversation we don't often hear from women. And I love that you brought it up. I won't belabor the point and I won't go into it too deeply, but I'm a rape survivor. So I was raped at the age of 23. And a part of my healing was through sex. It didn't happen until many, many years later. But the level of physicality, devoid of emotion that I can have, it's a way of taking control of your body again. It's a way to embody somatic awareness as a tool for managing trauma that I don't think we talk about often enough. And your use of sex toys in an exploratory way is so empowering and it's so necessary. And I hope every woman goes out and gets a vibrator or one of these, lovely sex toys today. I'm a huge proponent of couples using sex toys and women becoming more familiar with what sex toys can do. As Christian women and Muslim women, they'll say, oh no, I don't want to engage in masturbation. I said, so don't call it masturbation, call it vaginal mapping. Call it vaginal exploration. The conversation around incontinence and disability is also important for me as a perimenopausal woman who is plus size and who deals with bouts of incontinence. We don't think about sex as not just being for pleasure, but sex can also be for health. Having an orgasm a day, baby, that's self-care. Like, I don't, that's not right? Right?
Come on. No, I think that is so important because, I love that you talked about this, and especially for women who then become married, who then end up in these traditional ideas of relationships, and they're really hesitant. They don't know what to do. I know that when I was younger, I always had the idea that, I would stay a virgin until I got married. And then somewhere along the way, in my brain, I was like, well, how am I going to know what to do? What's going to happen when I get there? And we talk about it now, but even when I did become sexually active, and it was in my 20s, which was later than most people in my generation, to be honest with you, there was a lot of shame still around that. And then I spoke to friends of mine who got married at that point, and there was a lot of shame surrounding it. So much so that some of my friends who were married in their 20s ended up getting divorced pretty quickly. And a lot of the reason for that separation was around physical intimacy. So Angelica, if you could talk to us a little bit more about that and whether you've spoken with women who have had this issue and what you would say, because I know that there are a lot of women who, especially from the different generations, are really struggling with even being able to articulate this issue, especially because they are religious and they're very concerned with how their relationship with God will end up, forgetting the reality that sex is a divine gift, that intimacy is a divine gift. So please, Angelica, just jump into that. I know we have a little bit more time, so I'm stoked.
Well, let me just start by saying that sex is a piece of heaven on earth. It's paradise. It's the only taste of paradise that you're going to get on earth. It is the one act that when you are engaged in it, you are experiencing some of that bliss that you will get in the hereafter. And so we should approach sex with the level of sanctity and divinity that it deserves. So that's the first thing. You can be sexual and you can be spiritual. The pastor's wife, the reverend's wife, the imam's wife, they have sex. That's how they have all those children. And that's why they rush home after Sunday service and after Jummah, right? Like you can, there's nothing wrong with it. And I talk to women all the time. I had a woman who said, Angelica, I'm 35 years old. I've been married for 17 years. I have never had an orgasm. This was on an Instagram live that I did. And I said, we need to have a conversation. We literally had a 20-minute conversation. I gave her some tools that she could use to not physical tools. I didn't tell her to go get a vibrator or anything like that. I talked to her about shifting her mindset around sex. She sent me a message 48 hours later and said, I just had my first orgasm ever. It is so important to understand that orgasms and sexual pleasure is 90% mental. Our mental blockages around what we think women should do, what we think women should like. I don't want my husband to know I enjoy sex. These are conversations that I have with women before they get married and let them know you have just as much a right to pleasure as he does. And any man who is afraid of you liking pleasure is simply not the man for you. You have women don't know their bodies, who don't explore. So one of the things that you can do, and it's completely non-sexual, is embrace the sensuality in every day. I'm wearing a scarf today. I like the way this scarf feels because it's soft, it caresses my face, it feels good. That is understanding sensually what tantalizes me, sensually what excites me. What do you like to hear? What do you like to feel? What do you like to smell? What do you like to taste? Diving into those things. Eat slowly, listen to music that you like to listen to. Feel your body. Look at yourself naked when you get out of the shower. Admire all the dips, curves, and crevices that you have on your body. It's important to do that before sex enters into the picture, because you have to love the body that you're in. And, we could talk at length about body positivity and how women enjoy their bodies and things like that. But it really starts again with that self-love and that self-awareness. How do you feel in your body, and how do you show up during sex? I'll have sisters say, well, I don't have orgasms with my husband because he likes to enter me from behind. He likes to do a doggy style and my belly is too big and it hangs down low. I'm like, sis, he's not looking at that. Sometimes in self-consciousness, like we're so self-conscious that we don't allow ourselves to enjoy. So those are the mental blockages that we have, which is again why women don't like sex toys, they don't like things like that. We really have to shift our mindset around sex so that we can really enjoy it as the full body experience that it's meant to be.
I love that. This conversation. I mean, I know we could go on and on. Makosi, did you want to jump in? Did you want to chip in there?
Yes, I wanted to say, coming into what Angelica was saying, also remembering that as women, we are conditioned that sex doesn't belong to us, or pleasure doesn't belong to us. So even when you're getting married in my culture, I'm Tswana speaking, so when you get married, you get a talk from all these elderly women and they'll tell you about how to please your husband and what to do for your husband. So having these conversations with the women now in my 30s and saying, actually, sex goes both ways. You're not just there to please him or to do what he says. It also has to be about what you want. Is a conversation that I'm having with my age mates, online. And it's interesting because when we are being raised as girl children, everything is about how we're going to be of service to the outside world. Nothing is about how we are going to be of service to ourselves. So that's why I think the disconnect with sex and pleasure for women, for Black women especially, comes from us being taught that it doesn't belong to you. It's sacred because it belongs to your husband. The same way your virginity belongs to your father until he passes you off to the man that's going to marry you. So being able to come back to ourselves and say, okay, no, but what about me, is a conversation that women need to have more, I think.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Jerome, I would love to know, because I know you deal especially with couples counseling and you deal with married couples and people who are having issues, and statistics, even though I don't have any in front of me, I know a number of statistics do refer to sex being an issue within marriages, within married couples. It's a big reason why a lot of people decide to go their separate ways. And I wonder what sort of advice you give to couples, especially when they've reached that point that, even romantic comedies, they do it where they say, after a certain while, people just stop being intimate. You don't care. It's like the furniture. They're just there. What do you say to couples and people who feel like that's just what happens? It just kind of breaks down.
The issues you find today with marriage, where you have problems with couples and also with sex, has a lot to do with the fact that sex is actually everywhere today. Sex is at your face. It's everywhere. Sex is no longer something that, sex has become very cheap. Let me just put it that way. You meet someone today and the next minute you guys are having sex together. A lot of people as well at the same time, when it comes to relationships, when I talk to a single person, I say, are you seeing anybody? And she says, no, I'm single. Are you sure you're single? Says, yes, I'm single. By the time we talk for a period of time, I realized that she's into a lot of pre-exclusive relationships. You can Google on pre-exclusive relationships to understand it. So at the same time, she says, I'm single, but she's seeing somebody. She says she's single, but she's having sex with somebody that she has no relationship with. She says she's single, but she's talking to somebody 24 hours, somebody else. So at the end of the day, she's probably involved with about 4 guys. And one guy is also involved with about 4 different females. And so before you know what's going on, sex is just everywhere and it's very cheap. Now, when it comes to marriage, one of the things that you'll find out is a lot of people have not been too touched cold made to understand so much about the role of sex, even in marriage. They just think it's that thing you do so quickly, so fast, and you get out. A lot of people do not understand, how do you really get into sex like Angelica is talking about? How do you have that kind of experience? Angelica has talked about that kind of sex, but I can assure you that 78% of couples that are married don't have that experience, and they're married and they don't have that kind of experience. They don't do that because there's usually no connect or no connection eventually, even when marriage has come in. There's no connection because they're not used to this ability to commit, really commit to someone. They've been so much involved with pre-exclusive relationships that right now they're in a marriage, but they're not able to really, really connect to one person. It's something they have done over the years, being with different people, without any connection. And so it's not expensive to them. It costs them nothing, being involved with different people at the same time. Now they're married and now they have sex, but there's no real connection. They tell you that a woman who is probably in her 50s, mid 50s, and going into her 60s and all of that may not be able to enjoy sex because right now she's going into menopause, she's going into this, she's going into that. And I'm telling you that there's a cure for that, which of course Loretta and myself found. And that is when you get to a point as a man, and I'm talking to all men right now, all men, because a lot of men are afraid of that stage, even if they never connect to this woman, they still want to have sex with her because that's the wife. Even when they've gone round, they still try to come back and have sex once in a while, and men are very much afraid of menopause, that stage. Even if they are also having issues with erection at that time because of high blood pressure and so many things. However, when you get to a point, what we found out, where your woman becomes very secure with you, very, very secure with you, quite secure with you. Even when you talk about menopause, you find out that we have women right now who are 70 still get very wet and are still able to have good sex in their marriage. And these are the things we're trying to help couples to understand, right now, especially the men. Because the men don't see any reason why a woman, most men, I wouldn't say all the men, don't see any reason it's none of their business if the woman has orgasm or not. It's none of their business. But at the end of the day, what they don't understand is this. A woman who's got orgasm, from you, from having sex with you, is ready to even go more with you and do much more than you can ever expect, that you might never need to get out there to meet another woman to feeling what she couldn't feeling. So right here, the men are going through some kind of reorientation. They're beginning to understand so many things, and they're also understanding, look, it's not every time a woman wants you to have penetration with her. A lot of times, the woman is so excited to have you be with her, to have you listen to her, to have you do everything. Do you know when a woman says, "Oh, I don't want penetration tonight. Oh, I don't want sex. Oh, I don't want anything." As a man, you can just say, "Okay, that's all right." But you know what? Sit down with her, talk to her, listen to her.
Got you.
She wants to feel very comfortable and very relaxed with you, and then she'll have the real good sex at the same time. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Angelica, please do chime in. I know that Jerome mentioned a few things around menopause, but you have a lot to say about that as well. So please do jump in.
Sorry, I think that's a gross misconception about menopause, though, and it seems to place the importance of sexual pleasure and being sexually available on the woman, and it seems to reinforce this misguided notion that women have a sexual expiration date. The reality is that that's a Western colonial concept that says that when a woman reaches a certain age, she has reached sexual exploration. The opposite is actually true. A woman during menopause, that is a time of immense sexual expansion. Women tend to experience greater body positivity. They have a greater connectedness to self. And if they're in a long-term relationship or even a new relationship, they have a better idea of what they're seeking out of that relationship. So you have women in their 50s, their 60s, their 70s who are having mind-blowing sex. Your grandmother is still having sex. The church mother, she's still having sex. I did a workshop and there was a woman who was 80 years old and she came up to me and she said, "Baby girl, I just want you to know I still have an orgasm at least once a week. That's part of my self-care plan. I did not need to know that much about that woman, but it gave me a lot of hope, right? Because this conversation around sex, I'm 46 years old, and I'm just going to be totally honest. I'm 46. I've been married for 17 years in October. I have young men in their mid-20s trying to holler at me, and I'm like, I could be your mom. Like, I could be your mom. Like, I'm going into menopause, and you have young men who are like, no, we like a woman who is sexually ripened. So I think that there should be some pushback against men who have that. We don't have to make a justification for men to want to engage with their menopausal wives, because we don't do the same thing with erectile dysfunction. We don't talk about men in their 40s and their 50s who cannot get a very firm erection. We don't have that same sort of vitriol for men's sexual prowess as we do for women. And I think that is a conversation that definitely needs to shift, because everybody here has either lived on, been born in, or been to the continent of Africa. And all of us know, I guarantee all of us know a woman in her 50s who has a child that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. So that completely dismisses the notion that women have an age that they stop becoming sexually active. So I just had to jump in there, because I think that, we're having a conversation about ableism, but we also should talk about ageism and sexuality, especially as it relates to women.
Thank you so much, Jerome, Mahosi, Angelica. Thank you so much for this phenomenal conversation. I know we could be here for a few hours. That one I know for sure. However, we do have to wrap up, and I want to thank you guys for speaking openly, honestly, and just really contributing to this very, very important discussion around generational discord, but also love, sex, and relationships, and how each generation is trying to navigate that in the healthiest way possible. Again, for all of you out there who've been watching, I want to thank you for joining this panel discussion. We truly appreciate you. Continue to enjoy all the discussions here at the IK Arts and Book Festival 2021 online. Thank you.
Let me introduce a new wave, we change the rules. A new app that you can use. Wanna change your life, then choose. Save money and invest. Pay bills when you decide. Safe and secure for you when you need a loan. Request it. One bank for you, one bank for me. So chill and enjoy the ride. Stop the current account on it. One bank.
One Bank by Sterling. Open a current account and start transacting.